Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 2 of the Rutgers football season with the Scarlet Knights at 1-0 after a win at the Michigan State Spartans. They will face off at home against the Indiana Hoosiers, coming off a big win against then number 8 Penn State in overtime. Battle of 1-0 teams. Let's see who's going to win this game. Now let's start with your Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Now, last week, the Scarlet Knights won an 11-point game at Michigan State. Final score of 38-27, breaking a 21-game Big Ten losing streak. With Greg Schauner's first game out of the way and his first win out of the way in the Big Ten, they're looking forward to even better success this season. Last week, Rutgers threw for 170 yards on 5.7 yards per attempt. They rushed for 106 on 2.6 per attempt. They allowed 319 passing yards on about 7 yards per attempt. And they only allowed 60 rushing yards on only 1.2 yards per attempt. Now, the big thing that led to a win there, even though they had 100 less yards than Michigan State, was turnovers. They had a +5 turnover ratio. Now, I'm just saying they did have a lot less yards, but I think if they didn't have the turnovers and had such great field position, the yardage would be a lot more equal. Maybe even they'd have more. I'm just saying, but those turnovers really made a difference in that game. That's a little bit of new coach at Michigan State. They didn't do very well, but also Rutgers was being very aggressive. They were ball hawks, and they were just very good at forcing turnovers in that game. And they allowed 2 sacks, and they also had 2 sacks, so the sacks there were pretty even. And now we are on to the opponent, the Indiana Hoosiers, who are just coming off an overtime win, a controversial one, against then number 8 Penn State. In that game, the Indiana Hoosiers threw for 170 yards on about 4.7 yards per attempt, so they threw for about the same passing yards. They had very little rushing yards. They only had about 41 rushing yards total on only about 1.6 yards per attempt. They allowed a decent amount of passing yards, 238 on 6.8 yards per attempt, and a lot of rushing yards, 250 on 4.5 yards per attempt. Now, they were +1 turnover ratio. They actually had 270 less yards than Penn State in that game, which is insane. Both these teams coming in with having less yards and coming out with a W. They had 1 sack, but they allowed 3, so it's a -2 on the sack ratio, which wasn't very good. Their weak spot definitely looked to be their offensive line. And Penn State is a very good team, so you can't take too much away from them there. They did beat a number 8 team, even though they got a little lucky, probably just like Rutgers did against Michigan State. Okay, now all I'll go over is a worst case, a best case scenario, and what I actually think will happen in the game. So first off, a worst case scenario for Rutgers. D-line looks nothing like it did last week. They do horrible. They don't do anything. O-line looks hard. They can just get easy pressure on them from Indiana. Rushing game, their running back who decommitted from Rutgers for Indiana gets a lot of yards, gets lots of open holes. Rutgers doesn't get the same turnover ratio they did last week. In fact, they maybe lose that turnover ratio, and it's just a horrible game, and they get blown out, and they just show that maybe it was just Michigan State being bad, or they got a little lucky with the turnovers. Now on to best case scenario for Rutgers. I think best case scenario is a close game. Maybe they win. I doubt it, but that's a best case scenario, like I'm saying. This is their D-line looks great again, and they absolutely dominate the Indiana offensive line, which looked pretty bad last week. Indiana allowed a lot of rushing yards actually last week against Penn State on QB runs from the Penn State quarterback, and Vedral is a mobile quarterback, so he gets a lot of rushing yards in this game. That is a big thing that you think might happen, and if he can get the rushing game going at QB, that's big. And then Rutgers gets a lot of turnovers again. It just shows they're really ball hawking. They get a lot of turnovers. Maybe they block a kick or a punt like Shiana used to do in his first turn around in Rutgers. And Rutgers gets a close game. Maybe they lose or maybe they even win a really close game. Now on to what I think will actually happen. I don't think Indiana's going to be able to run the ball a lot. I think Rutgers D-line is going to do good. I think that Rutgers O-line is not going to hold up something against Michigan State. Their offensive line for Michigan State their defensive line looked horrible last week. I think they'll start getting pressure. It's going to be a little hard to pass. It's going to be harder to run. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game, and I'm going to say Indiana wins by something like 24-14, something like 27-17, 27-14, something around that range. I think they win by 2 scores in a low-scoring game. I think the defenses have shown in both the games that they are better, most likely, than the offenses. And that's what I think is going to happen in this game. Now, I'll give 2 bold predictions for this week. I think that Rutgers holds Indiana to another less than 50 rushing yards. I think they're really going to clamp down on that. Maybe even force a few fumbles on the line of scrimmage. Maybe hold a few 4th down attempts on 4th and shorts. And I also think that Vedral will rush for a lot of yards, something around maybe even 75 yards. I think he'll run for a lot because I think that the offensive coordinator for Rutgers, Sean Gleason, definitely saw that last week. And you might even see a lot of Langen, actually. Because he's such a great runner. You're going to see a lot of him possibly with these QB runs. Maybe they even surprise him with a pass play there. You never know, as a trick play, maybe if it's a close game. But yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of QB rushing yards, at least 75, I think, in this game from whoever it is, Vedral or Langen. Okay, and thank you for watching. Those are my predictions for Rutgers versus Indiana. Now, if you've gotten this far, I'm assuming you're an Indiana or Rutgers fan. And if you're part of that second group, a Rutgers fan, then you found a place for you. This channel, I do Rutgers predictions every week. I'll try to do basketball predictions when they start up. See if you're interested in Rutgers sports, especially football and basketball. Subscribe to this channel to get videos on Rutgers sports. Bye.